It is part of the job of a university to inculcate a certain maturity in students. I sound like Charles Eliot Norton. It sounds so obscure and antique, but a certain amount of maturity. And we are not going to suspend that when it comes to race issues. The idea is going to be that everybody learns that the world can be a difficult place. We're not going to pretend that when it comes to racism, that somehow it's different. And there are issues of degree here. But when we're talking about something one person said one time 100 years ago, that's staged delicacy. That is not what racism is in any meaningful sense. And if a Black student claims, accompanied by a few others, that she can't walk by that rock without feeling bad, that's not a legitimate claim of injury. And just because a Black person says it doesn't mean that it's automatically legitimate. And that's the problem these days. I'm standing athwart this idea that when it comes to racism, intent is less important than impact, which just means that you have to listen to whatever the Black person says. And I've heard white people, parrot this. I don't know what they're feeling. It's my job to just give in. No, I reject that. When we're talking about something that is so obviously nonsensical as this, it's not even a close call. Your job is to say, no, not that. Now, there are ways of doing it diplomatically. We're not going to take the rock away, but here are 2 or 3 other things that we can do to make this a less racist institution. Now, maybe some of this, Glenn, maybe part of the problem is that it's easier to remove a rock than to automatically hire some number of Black faculty, when frankly, there might not be any Black faculty to be had for those particular lines. Easier to go get a crane and to move a rock. But still, it's such a hopeless case. And, another thing is, and I don't expect a Rebecca Blank to think about this, not her specifically here, but just as a generic category. But, even if that rock had been called Niggerhead Rock, regularly until, say, about 1975. And then I'm in college decades later, and I find out that it used to be called that. I would feel that the removal of the rock meant that the racists in the past won. I'm walking by the rock decades later. Nobody calls it that anymore. It's something you have to learn from some of the old heads. And, most people don't know it. And then you find out it used to be called that by people, most of whom are now dead. And you just can't take it. Oh, my sanity. Oh, I feel there's so much racism. And now there's this. Every time I walk by, I get a little headache. No, that means that the bigots won. I don't want that rock taken away. Imagine now the rock's not there. The idea being people called it something, we can't bear to look at it. And so we're going to take that rock and put it somewhere else. It's such a capitulation. And the person in response to me will say, well, why should we have to fight? But the thing is, it's a staged demand. You weren't fighting. You were just fine. You were walking by that rock texting. They're trying to come up with a way of participating in the struggle when the struggle is more abstract than it used to be. But that's me speaking to the students. Stick your fist in the air and stop pretending. Just leave the rock alone. But in this case, it wasn't even 1975. It's not Niggerhead Rock. It's somebody called it a niggerhead in 1925. But we're supposed to pretend not to understand the distinction between those two kinds of cases. It won't do.
Okay, let me try again. The University of Wisconsin goes this argument. This is the argument on behalf of removing the rock. This is a justification for students making a set of demands that you're objecting to. The University of Wisconsin is and has always been a racist institution. That's our starting point. Here at Brown, where I teach, the fact that the university's endowment comes out of, in part, a fortune that was accumulated based on trafficking slaves, and in textile and banking and insurance and so forth, businesses that were bolstered by their involvement with the slave South in the late 18th and into the 19th century, is a major issue here. In the first year, our freshman students come in, they all read over the summer before they begin classes a common text. And then there are seminars organized to discuss this common text. That's a tradition that's been going on for many years here at Brown. The last 2 years, that text has been the Slavery and Justice Committee's report on the history of Brown University's entanglement with slavery. Now, that entanglement with slavery ended before the Civil War. In fact, the Brown family, which endowed the university, was itself divided between brothers who were on either side of the question of abolition before the Civil War, and the abolitionist brother won out in the end in this dispute within the family. That was 175, 200 years ago. But today, Brown is, there's a Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice, which has been established to memorialize and to carry on into the 21st century the recognition of Brown's moral culpability in the history of its fortune, big basis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Woodrow Wilson, his name was taken off of the School of Public Policy at Princeton. Princeton and Woodrow Wilson haven't had anything to do with each other since the brother Wilson died. What was that? 1919 or something like that? Well, yeah. in the spirit of Cornel West, we're all brothers, you know. But he died in the 20s. He died like 100 years ago. Okay, yeah. So you see what I'm saying? In other words, if to take your position, it seems to me that you really have to stake out the following. We're not a racist institution here at the University of Wisconsin. Neither are we here at Brown. This history that you people are blowing up into a federal case and that you're going apoplectic about is all you've got. All you've got is the name of a rock from 100 years ago. That's all you've got, because real racism, let me tell you what it looks like, okay? It looks like what Jim Crow South looked like 100 years ago, but the University of Wisconsin today is run by progressive, enlightened people. It is a part of a society which is itself the freest and most tolerant and most diverse multi-ethnic democracy ever to have graced the planet Earth. You're the most privileged amongst the most privileged people alive now, et cetera, et cetera. You'd have to get into an argument about that. But the defenders of it are saying this history has a continuity. Georgetown University sold slaves in 1840 that they owned in order to not go bankrupt. You must make amends for that. You must make reparation for that. Brown University, the grounds on which it stands were acquired by money that is dripping with blood because it was involved in the slave trade. Well, everything was involved in the slave trade by 1 or 2 degrees removed in the middle of the 19th century in the United States of America. You can't find a fortune that didn't in some way or another touch on the slave trade, because cotton was so ubiquitous, and finance and insurance, transportation, providing the raw materials that supported the agriculture in which slave labor fed, the benefits from that, et cetera. So anyway, I ramble. I don't mean to do that. I mean, there's a more fundamental issue here about how we look at the past and about disabusing these kids of their presumption of moral superiority, because they can point with the benefit of hindsight to the way people were living 100 years ago and say that they are offended by that, when what they're really doing is saying there's a continuous connection between that and the institutions today. And it's those institutions that we seek to indict. And they're wrong about that, but they need to be engaged and disabused of the claims that they're making. There's nothing morally suspect about the University of Wisconsin in the 21st century. It's an engine of opportunity. It's a gateway into the middle class for the residents of that state, and et cetera, et cetera. And moreover, the fact that Black students on the campus may not feel comfortable probably has more to do with the extent of their own preparation for the competitive meritocratic challenges of a high-end education than it has to do with racism. So this argument would go, and you see why people don't want to make it, because it'll get you on the wrong side of an industry of of complaint and supposed entitlement.